Hello and welcome to lesson 27. We're going to talk about the aorist passive, indicative, imperative, and infinitive of omega verbs like paideo. And to do this, we're going to need to add a sixth principal part. And this is the final principal part we're going to be learning. So, paideo, I teach. We get the present and imperfect, active, middle, and passive from that principal part. Paideuso, I will teach. We get the future active and middle from that. Epaideusa, I taught. We get the aorist active and middle from that. Pepaideuka, I have taught. We get the perfect and pluperfect active from that. Pepaideumai, I have been taught. We get the perfect and pluperfect middle passive from that. And now epaidophane, I was taught. And we're going to get the aorist passive from that. And we're also in a future lesson going to get the future passive from that. Okay, so that's going to fill in the passive forms that we couldn't form from those two principal parts. So here we go. We take the stem from that sixth principal part, epaideus, and remember this is the sixth principal part here, the first person singular aorist passive indicative, I was taught. So we take this stem from that sixth principal part, and we just add ein, ace, a, amen, eta, ason. It's pretty easy. One thing you're going to note, though, is that these don't look passive. You might have expected that we'd see sort of main saw taw endings like we saw with the aorist middle formed off the third principal part. But no, aorist passive endings look active. You only know that these are passive because they're coming from the sixth principal part. All right, so that's the aorist passive indicative. I was taught, you were taught, he, she, it was taught. There's an aorist imperative passive. Now remember, imperatives don't have time. They just have aoristic, simple aspect. So they're not going to have an augment. So you need to take the augment away from the sixth principal part, and that'll give you the stem. Okay, and then you add these endings, ate, ato, eta, entone. So, hey, you, singular, be taught, right? Let him be taught. You, plural, be taught. Let them be taught, okay? So there you go. That's the aorist imperative passive. Remember, it has aoristic aspect. And now infinitives. Remember, all the infinitives, again, don't have time. They just have aspect. So the aorist infinitive active, paideusai, right, to teach. The aorist infinitive middle, paideusasthai, right, to teach for one's own sake. Those come from the third principal part. And now the new aorist infinitive passive, paideutheinai, to be taught. All of these have aoristic aspect. Again, look, that looks active, right? That nai ending. Note too that the aorist infinitive active and passive don't have recessive accent. They're always accented on the penult. Okay, so if this syllable here is long, you're going to have a circumflex because this I counts as short for purposes of accentuation. You're always going to have a circumflex here because that's always an eta. And again, that final I counts as short for purposes of accentuation. There's also an aorist passive participle. And again, its endings are going to look active. So there's our stem from the sixth principal part with any augment removed. Okay. For the masculine and the neuter, we're using third declension endings, right? The stem is really this ent, right? The nominative masculine singular should be ents, right? But that drops out and we have compensatory lengthening. So that's why it's ace, right? Then entos, enti, accusative enta. The neuter, right? It's that ent ending with the final dental dropped off. En, entos, enti, en. And the feminine uses first declension short alpha endings. Okay, so it looks like Moira. And then here's the plural, again, exactly as you'd expect. Again, right? We have the NT dropping out and the compensatory lengthening, but it's exactly what you'd expect. Okay, first declension endings here, third declension endings in the masculine and the neuter. Now let's look at another verb, klepto. So klepto, klepso, eklepsa, keklepha, keklemai, eklapame. There's that sixth principal part. So take off the final ain, and that's your stem right there. It works exactly like you'd expect. The only difference here is that there's not a theta there. Okay. One place where this does make a difference is there. You can remember that the aorist imperative passive of paideia was paideu. Whoops, there's our stem, right? And then the ending was ate, right? And that's because you don't want to have the aspiration in both those places. You don't want it to be paideu thethi. However, here, where that's not aspirated, we do have the theta ending. Okay, so if you have a theta there, you're going to have eta. If you don't, you're going to have etha. Other than that, exactly like padeo. And again, exactly like padeo. So if you don't have a theta at the end of the stem for the sixth principal part, you're going to that second person singular aorist imperative passive, you're going to have etha instead of eta. Other than that, exactly the same. No difference at all. And here's the aorist passive participle for klepto. Again, exactly the same. I will note, okay, all of these aorist passive participles get their accent above the ent there. Okay, they're all accented over that same syllable. Okay, and that's it. That's the aorist passive. It's pretty simple.